The moment my daughter-in-law stood up at Christmas dinner and announced she was taking control of everything, my own son didn't look at me even once. I remember the exact second it happened because the air in the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically. It simply went still, like the pause before something breaks. We were sitting in Travis's house in a quiet neighborhood outside Detroit, the kind with trimmed lawns and matching mailboxes. Snow pressed softly against the windows. The smell of roasted turkey and cinnamon candles filled the room. It should have felt warm. It should have felt safe. It didn't. My name is Helene Whitmore. I'm 69 years old. And that night, dressed in a dark blue wool sweater I'd owned for years, I sat at the long dining table watching my family celebrate something I didn't yet understand. Marina, my daughter-in-law, pushed her chair back and stood up. She was glowing in a way that drew attention instantly. 5 months pregnant. Perfect hair, perfect smile, one hand resting on her belly like a symbol of authority. She lifted her glass gently and tapped it with a spoon. The soft clink silenced the room. Travis, my son, looked up at her with admiration, the kind that used to be reserved for me when he was little. The conversation stopped. Even the kids sensed it and froze mid-movement. "I just want to say something before we eat," Marina said, her voice calm, confident, practiced. "This Christmas is special. We're not just celebrating the holidays. We're celebrating a new chapter." She paused, letting the words settle. "With a baby on the way, Travis and I have had a lot of serious conversations about responsibility, about structure, about stability." My stomach tightened. "That's why we made a decision," she continued. "Starting today, I'll be managing all the finances for this family." A murmur of approval moved through the table. "That makes sense," someone said. "She's so organized," another added. Marina smiled and then turned her eyes toward me, not warmly, not kindly, assessing, measuring. "Helene," she said, using my first name the way people do when they want to sound gentle but aren't. "This morning we had your credit card canceled. It's really for the best. At your age, you shouldn't have to worry about money anymore." The words hit the table harder than any fist ever could. She kept smiling. "If you need anything, of course, you can just ask Travis." My son nodded slowly, as if this were all reasonable. Around us, glasses lifted. Someone laughed awkwardly. Someone said, "Honestly, that's smart. Older people get taken advantage of all the time." I looked at my hands. They were steady. That surprised me. For a moment, I thought I might cry, or shout, or stand up and leave. But none of that happened. Something colder and clearer settled inside my chest. I lifted my glass, took a small sip, then placed it back on the table. The sound was quiet, but it carried. I stood up slowly. Every joint reminded me of my age, but I stood straight. I looked directly at my son, at the boy I raised alone in Detroit after his father died, the boy who once slept beside the sound of machines and promised me he would always protect me. I smiled. "Travis," I said softly, "you really don't know, do you?" His smile vanished. The room went silent again. This time no one spoke. Marina frowned, confused, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Know what?" Travis asked. I didn't answer, because to understand why that question froze the room, you have to know who I really am. And to know that, you have to go back to a Sunday afternoon 6 months earlier, when everything started. 6 months earlier. The doorbell rang on a crisp October Sunday, and I knew before I opened it that my life was about to shift. Travis stood on my porch with a smile I hadn't seen since he was a boy, the kind that lifted his whole face and made him look younger, lighter, free. "Mom," he said, "there's someone I want you to meet." Behind him stood a woman I would come to know as Marina Chen, soon to be Marina Whitmore. She was polished. Every detail was intentional. Her posture, her voice, even the way she laughed, just a second after everyone else, as if she needed to measure the room before responding. She wore a fitted navy coat, expensive leather boots, and carried herself like someone used to being admired. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said warmly, extending her hand, "it's so nice to finally meet you." Her handshake was brief, firm, professional, but her eyes moved quickly. They swept across my living room, the worn armchair I'd reupholstered myself, the shelves lined with old repair manuals and family photos, the coffee table Travis had built in high school. She smiled the entire time, but her gaze never stopped evaluating. That was the first thing that unsettled me. Over dinner, Marina spoke easily about her work. Project coordination, she said. Strategic planning, deadlines, pressure. You know how it is. She used confident language, but when I asked gentle follow-up questions, which company are you with now? What kind of projects? The details blurred. Oh, you know, she said lightly. A little bit of everything. The gig economy keeps you moving. Travis didn't notice. He was watching her the way people watch something they're afraid to lose. I noticed everything. In the weeks that followed, Marina became a regular presence. She invited Travis to restaurants with white tablecloths and wine lists. She encouraged him to buy new clothes, talked about image, about how important it was to look successful before you become successful. At first, I told myself it was none of my business. My son was 32 years old. He had a good job as a civil engineer. He'd chosen her. Who was I to interfere? But patterns reveal themselves if you wait. Marina never offered specifics about her past. Her family stories changed depending on the audience. Sometimes they were well-connected, sometimes they were distant, sometimes they were just complicated. She spoke of money casually. We should invest. We need to think bigger, but avoided conversations about saving. She paid with credit cards that seemed to change frequently. Different banks, different designs. One evening after they left, I sat alone in my living room longer than usual. Something felt wrong. Not because Marina was ambitious. Ambition isn't a sin, but because her ambition felt hollow, directionless, desperate. So I did what I'd learned to do long ago. I verified. I didn't hire a private investigator. I wasn't dramatic about it. I simply Googled her name, checked LinkedIn, scrolled through publicly available information the way anyone might. What I found wasn't criminal, but it was fragile. Marina had worked for 5 different companies in 3 years. Her LinkedIn showed gaps, vague titles, short tenures. When I ran a basic credit check, the kind you can request legally when someone applies for joint accounts, her score appeared. Low. Concerning. I dug a little deeper. Public records showed a past eviction, resolved quietly, credit lines with high balances, late payments, a family history marked by financial collapse. She wasn't evil. She was afraid, and afraid people calculate. I could have told Travis then. I could have shown him the facts and shattered the illusion before it grew roots. But I imagined his face if I did. The way he would look at me, not as a mother protecting him, but as an obstacle. A bitter woman who couldn't let go. So I chose silence. I told myself that love might soften her, that stability might calm her hunger, that once she felt secure, she would stop reaching. I underestimated what fear does to people who believe money is the only thing standing between them and humiliation. Maybe that was my first mistake. After they married, small ceremony, city hall, just family, the shift was subtle at first. Marina began asking questions that sounded caring. Does your mom have a plan for the future? Is she comfortable managing things on her own? Do you ever worry she might get taken advantage of? Travis came to me with concern in his eyes, repeating words that weren't his. Mom, have you thought about what happens if something goes wrong? With your house? Your accounts? I told him I was fine, that I'd been managing on my own for almost 40 years, that I didn't need help. He looked relieved but uncertain, and Marina watched. She never confronted me directly. She didn't need to. She was mapping influence, studying where authority lived, learning how to step into it without appearing to push. By the time she became pregnant, her tone had changed completely. She no longer asked questions. She made statements. Travis and I think it's time to be proactive. We've been reading about elder fraud. It's scary out there. We just want to make sure you're protected. And somewhere between her fear and her ambition, she decided something dangerous, that I was no longer a person. I was a problem to be managed. The takeover didn't happen all at once. If it had, I might have seen it clearly. I might have stopped it sooner. But Marina was patient, and patience can be far more dangerous than aggression. It began with concern. Travis started calling less. Not dramatically less, just enough that our Sunday lunches became every other week, then once a month. When I asked, he sounded apologetic. Marina's been tired. The pregnancy's been harder than expected. I understood that. Or I wanted to. Then came the suggestions. Mom, Marina thinks it might be safer if I helped you organize your paperwork, just in case something happens. Nothing had happened. I was healthy, independent, still working part-time fixing industrial equipment because I enjoyed it, not because I needed the money. But the way he said it made refusing sound irresponsible. I declined gently. Marina smiled thinner after that. Next came the visits that felt like inspections. She would glance at my mail on the counter, ask casual questions about bills, comment on the neighborhood. "Are you sure you feel safe here at night?" she asked once. "Detroit's changing so fast." I'd lived through Detroit changing more times than she could imagine. Through the riots of '67, through the bankruptcies, through the slow resurrections. I knew this city's rhythms better than my own heartbeat. But I didn't say that. I just smiled. Then the narrative shifted. Travis began repeating phrases I'd never used. At your age, long-term planning, risk exposure. One afternoon he arrived with printed articles, all about scams targeting seniors, financial abuse, identity theft, pages highlighted in yellow, important passages circled in red. "Lauren just worries about you," he said. "She reads a lot." The first real boundary fell when they asked me to sign a limited power of attorney. "Just so I can help with banking and emergencies," Travis explained. I refused. Marina didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes cool, and changed the subject. But she didn't forget. Weeks later, Travis called me, sounding strained. "Mom, I don't want to fight about this, but Marina's really stressed. She's scared about the baby. She thinks if something happens to you and no one has access, it could cause problems. For us." For us. That phrase told me everything. 2 weeks before Christmas, my credit card stopped working. I was standing in line at the grocery store near my house. I'd chosen simple things: bread, soup, apples, eggs. Nothing extravagant. When the cashier swiped my card and handed it back with an apologetic look, I felt a quiet humiliation rise up my spine. "It's declined," she said softly. I paid with cash and went home with my hands shaking. At the bank, the clerk spoke gently. "The authorized contact requested cancellation. It's a protective measure, Mrs. Whitmore." "Who authorized it?" I asked, though I already knew. She gave me Travis's name. I called him immediately. "Mom, please don't be upset," he said quickly. "Marina found some articles about fraud targeting seniors. We thought it would be safer this way. You canceled my card without telling me. We were going to explain when we saw you at Christmas. We thought, I repeated. "Travis, when did your thoughts become someone else's?" Silence. That night I sat alone in my living room and felt something shift. Not anger, clarity. Marina was no longer hiding her intentions. And Christmas was 2 weeks away. To understand why I stood up at that Christmas table and asked my son a question that would change everything, you need to know who I was long before Marina ever entered our lives. You need to go back 38 years, to a winter in Detroit when I had nothing but grief, debt, and a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I was standing alone in a freezing hospital hallway on the east side of Detroit, holding a paper cup of coffee I never drank, listening to a doctor explain that my husband was not coming back. His name was Robert Whitmore. He worked nights at a steel processing plant just outside the city. Long shifts, dangerous machines, honest work that paid enough to keep us comfortable. Not rich, but safe. That winter, a mechanical failure crushed his lower body before anyone could shut the system down. He died before the ambulance arrived. I was 7 months pregnant. I remember walking out of the hospital into the snow without a coat because I'd forgotten it inside the room where his body lay. I remember thinking that if I stopped moving, I might not start again. So I walked 1 block, then another, until my legs gave out and I sat on a frozen bus bench and pressed my hands against my stomach. "I don't know how," I whispered to the child inside me, "but I'm going to keep you alive." 2 weeks later, the bills arrived. Medical expenses, funeral costs. A notice from the bank reminding me that Robert had co-signed a loan for equipment we could no longer afford. Another letter warning that if payments weren't made, our small rented house would be seized as collateral for outstanding debt. I was 29 years old. I had no college degree, no savings, no parents left to help me. My mother had died when I was 19. My father 2 years later. All I had was a battered toolbox Robert kept in the garage and a skill most people never noticed. I knew machines. Before I met Robert, I'd worked repairing industrial sewing machines for small garment shops around Detroit. Old equipment, rusted gears, belts that snapped without warning. It wasn't glamorous work, but I was good at it. I understood how systems failed and how to make them work again. When Travis was born, 8 pounds, 2 ounces, crying like he was angry at the world, I brought him home to a house with heat that barely worked and cupboards that echoed when I closed them. I slept in 2-hour stretches, waking to feed him, then working late into the night repairing machines for cash. I charged less than I should have. I accepted delayed payments. I said yes too often. There were nights I cried silently while rocking Travis with one hand and tightening bolts with the other. Nights when I wondered if loving him was selfish because I couldn't give him more. But somewhere in that exhaustion, something hardened inside me. I stopped thinking about survival in weeks. I started thinking in years. I learned which shop owners paid on time and which made excuses. I learned which neighborhoods were quietly growing and which were being abandoned. I learned how to read contracts, how to ask questions without sounding desperate, how to wait. People saw a widow with grease under her nails and a baby on her hip. They didn't see someone paying attention. By the time Travis turned 3, I was no longer just fixing machines. I was buying broken ones, repairing them, and leasing them back to small warehouses that couldn't afford new equipment. It wasn't luck. It was patience. And while the city around me struggled, while buildings emptied and factories closed, I was learning something no one ever taught me. The people who survive are not always the loudest. Sometimes they're the ones who build quietly while everyone else is looking the other way. The real turning point came from a man named Richard Sullivan. I met him because one of his loading machines broke down at a small logistics facility near the river, and no one else wanted to touch it. The job took me 12 hours and 3 skinned knuckles. When I finished, he watched me wipe grease from my hands and said something I never forgot. "You don't just fix things," he said. "You understand how they work." Richard was in his 60s, a retired logistics manager who owned 3 small storage buildings. He started asking questions. I answered carefully, honestly. He explained how leasing space worked, how depreciation could be used strategically, how buying neglected property at the right moment mattered more than buying perfect property at the wrong time. He never gave me money. He gave me knowledge. And knowledge, I learned, compounds. My first purchase was a narrow industrial unit most people considered useless. The roof leaked. The doors barely closed. Pipes froze every winter. I bought it cheap using a private loan I negotiated myself. The interest rate was brutal, 12%, but I had no other options. I repaired it slowly, evenings and weekends, sometimes with Travis asleep on a cot nearby, his small body curled under a blanket while I worked. Then I rented it to a small auto parts distributor who paid reliably and asked few questions. That rent paid the loan. It took 3 years, 3 long years of every spare dollar going toward that debt. But I paid it. The next unit came easier. Then another. Detroit was changing. Factories were closing. Warehouses were being abandoned. Entire blocks were left to rot while people ran toward newer cities, chasing promises that never quite arrived. Everyone saw decay. I saw opportunity. I never told Travis. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was deliberate. I wanted him to grow up thinking success came from effort, not inheritance. I wanted him to study hard, to earn his place, to respect money instead of expecting it. So when he asked why we still lived simply, I told him the truth I chose. "This is enough," I said, and enough is powerful. As the years passed, my name appeared quietly on deeds no one noticed. Storage units, light industrial spaces, properties everyone else avoided because they weren't shiny. I didn't chase trends. I chased consistency. By the time Travis was in high school, I had enough passive income to stop working entirely. I didn't. I kept repairing machines. I kept wearing old sweaters. I kept driving the same car. Silence became my shield. But it also became my test. When Travis received his college acceptance letter, he believed he'd earned a scholarship. I paid the tuition through accounts he never saw. When he bought his first used car, I made the final payment through a structure I controlled quietly. He thanked me for helping with groceries. I thanked him for being responsible. People around us thought I was careful, frugal, slightly stubborn. Marina would later call it outdated. But silence does something powerful. It filters people. It shows you who respects you without knowing what you're worth, and who doesn't. By the time Travis met Marina, I owned 6 industrial properties generating steady income. I had investments spread carefully, conservatively, invisibly. My finances were reviewed quarterly by professionals who respected discretion. To the outside world, I was still Helene Whitmore, a widow, a repairwoman, a woman who lived simply because she had to. That was the story everyone believed. And that story was the very thing that allowed someone else to think they could take control of my life without asking. After Marina canceled my credit card, I didn't confront her immediately. I did what I'd always done. I gathered information. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and searched. Not dramatically, not illegally, just the things anyone can find if they know where to look. Public records, court filings, credit reports I could legally request. What I found painted a picture I'd already suspected but hoped wasn't true. Marina Chen had grown up in suburban Ohio, middle-class family. Her father worked in manufacturing. Her mother was a substitute teacher. Then 2008 hit. Her father lost his job when the auto industry collapsed. Her mother spent their savings on multi-level marketing schemes, convinced she could save them. Foreclosure, bankruptcy. A family that looked stable, crumbling in less than 2 years. Marina was 16 when it happened. I found an old newspaper article about the foreclosure, one of thousands during that time. It mentioned a family with a teenage daughter who'd had to transfer schools mid-year because they couldn't afford to stay in their district. That daughter was Marina. I imagined her at 16, watching her parents argue about money every night, watching her mother cry over bills, watching her father drink himself into silence. I understood then why money terrified her, why she saw it as the only thing standing between safety and ruin. But understanding someone's pain doesn't mean accepting their cruelty. As an adult, Marina had struggled. Student loans she couldn't pay down, credit card debt that spiraled, jobs that didn't last. 3 years ago, she had been evicted from an apartment in Ann Arbor. Court records showed she was 2 months behind on rent. She owed $43,000 across multiple credit lines. She wasn't a criminal. She wasn't even a liar, exactly. She was desperate. And desperate people make dangerous choices. When she met Travis, stable, kind, employed, responsible, she didn't just see a partner. She saw rescue. And when she became pregnant, she saw permanence. I sat with that information for a long time. Part of me wanted to show Travis immediately, to protect him from what I could see coming. But another part of me, the part that remembered being young and afraid, hesitated. Maybe, I thought, stability would change her. Maybe once she felt secure, she'd stop grasping. That was my second mistake, because Marina didn't just want security, she wanted control, and she'd decided that I was the obstacle. I tried to see it from her perspective. I really did. To Marina, I must have looked like a liability, an aging woman living alone in a modest house, working part-time fixing old machines, driving a 15-year-old sedan, refusing help with organizing. In her mind, I was vulnerable, easily scammed, a risk to Travis's future. She didn't see me taking control as cruelty. She saw it as responsibility. Someone has to protect him, I imagine her thinking. Someone has to be the adult. And if I wouldn't accept help, then help would have to be forced. That's how it works when fear runs the show. You stop seeing people as humans with agency. You see them as problems to be solved, risks to be managed. Marina's fatal flaw wasn't that she was evil. It was that she saw the world through the lens of scarcity. And in a scarce world, someone always has to lose for you to win. She'd chosen me to lose. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, because I'd hidden it so carefully, was that I'd spent 38 years making sure I would never be at anyone's mercy again. Not even my own son's. After my card was canceled, I made a decision. I called Edward Campbell, my estate attorney. I'd worked with Edward for 15 years. He was 72, gray-haired, steady, and unimpressed by drama. "Edward," I said when he answered, "I need your help with something." I explained the situation calmly. The card, the manipulation, Marina's escalating control. "Legally, what she did falls in a gray area," Edward said. "Travis was an authorized user on your account from years ago. Banks sometimes allow authorized users to make changes if they frame it as protective. It shouldn't have happened, but it's hard to prosecute." "I don't want to prosecute," I said. I want to reveal. There was a pause. Reveal what? Everything, I said. I want Travis to understand exactly who he's been helping to erase. Edward was quiet for a moment. Then, when? Christmas, I said. Family gathering. Public enough that she can't rewrite the narrative later. Are you sure about this, Helene? Once you do this, there's no going back. I've been going back for 6 months, I said. Trying to be understanding. Trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. And she took my dignity anyway. Then I'll prepare the documents, Edward said. We hung up. I sat in my quiet living room and thought about what was coming. Not with anger, not with revenge, with clarity. Marina wanted control because she thought power would make her safe. But power doesn't make you safe. Truth does. And at Christmas, she was going to learn the difference. The days leading up to Christmas felt strange, surreal. Travis called once to confirm I was coming to dinner. His voice was careful, like he was talking to someone fragile. We're really looking forward to seeing you, Mom, he said. I'm looking forward to it too, I replied. And I meant it. Marina texted me a list of dietary restrictions. Just want to make sure everyone's comfortable, she wrote, followed by 3 heart emojis. I responded, thank you for thinking of me. I meant that too. In a way, I spent that week quietly. I went to my storage units and checked on tenants. I fixed a conveyor belt at one facility myself, even though I could have hired someone. I liked the feel of tools in my hands, the certainty of mechanics. Machines don't lie. They break or they work. There's no gray area. On Christmas Eve, I laid out my clothes, the dark blue sweater, simple black slacks, comfortable shoes. I wasn't dressing for battle. I was dressing for truth. Edward called that evening to confirm everything was ready. The documents are prepared, he said. I'll arrive when you call. Thank you, Edward. Helene, he said, and his voice was gentle. Are you prepared for how Travis might react? I thought about that. About my son's face when he realized what he'd helped Marina do. About the pain that was coming for him. No, I said honestly. But I'm prepared to tell the truth anyway. That night I barely slept. Not from anxiety, from anticipation. Because for 38 years I'd built something remarkable while everyone thought I was barely surviving. And tomorrow, the silence would finally end. I arrived at Travis's house at 3 in the afternoon. The snow had picked up, coating everything in fresh white. Marina answered the door. She looked beautiful. Cashmere sweater, careful makeup, glowing with pregnancy. Helene, she said warmly. Come in, come in. Let me take your coat. She took my coat and my small dessert contribution, a simple apple pie, and set it on the counter without looking at it. Why don't you sit here? She said, gesturing to a chair at the far end of the long dining table. It's quieter. Better for you. I smiled and sat where I was told. The house filled with people. Travis's cousins, Marina's friends. A couple I didn't recognize. Everyone talking, laughing, the noise filling the spaces where conversation should be. Travis came over once, kissed my cheek. Glad you're here, Mom. Me too, sweetheart. He looked tired, uncertain, like he was performing a role he hadn't quite memorized. Dinner was served. Turkey, sides, wine. Marina had planned every detail, matching plates, folded napkins, candles. Control had become her language. Conversations flowed around me, about Marina's pregnancy, about Travis's promotion at work, about plans for the new year. No one asked me anything. It was as if I'd already been erased. And then Marina stood up. She tapped her glass gently with a spoon, the same way she'd practiced before. The sound cut through the room. Everyone turned toward her. I just want to take a moment, she said, her voice warm and clear. Because with the baby coming, it's important that we're all aligned. She placed a hand on her stomach. The room softened, the way it always does when pregnancy is invoked. Travis and I have decided it's time to be proactive about family finances, to reduce risk, to create structure. She turned toward me. That's why, starting today, I'll be managing everything. Helene won't need to worry anymore. She smiled wider. We already took the first step this morning by canceling her remaining access cards. It's for her protection. The room responded exactly as she expected. Nods, approval, relief. That's so responsible, someone said. It's about time someone stepped up, another voice added. Travis looked at me, uncertain, waiting for my reaction. I set my glass down. The sound was small, but it landed. I stood slowly. My knees complained. I ignored them. I looked directly at my son. Travis, I said softly, you really don't know, do you? The room stilled. Marina frowned. Know what? I didn't answer her. Instead, I reached into my purse and took out my phone. Edward, I said calmly when the line connected. You can come in now. Confusion rippled through the room. Who's Edward? Marina asked sharply. My attorney, I replied. Travis's face drained of color. Mom, what are you doing? The doorbell rang before I could answer. I walked to the door myself, my steps steady despite every eye in the room following me. When I opened it, Edward Campbell stepped inside, bringing a rush of cold air with him. He was exactly as I'd always known him, gray hair neatly combed, wearing a dark wool coat over a pressed suit, carrying a worn leather briefcase that had seen decades of careful use. Good evening, he said politely to the room. I represent Helene Whitmore. He moved to the dining table without hesitation, set his briefcase down and opened it. The click of the latches was the only sound in the house. Papers filled the space. Documents organized in clear folders. Deeds, statements, appraisals. Everything precise, everything verified. The silence thickened like ice forming over water. Edward spoke clearly, his voice carrying the weight of facts that couldn't be argued with. Mrs. Whitmore owns 6 industrial properties within Detroit city limits, 2 logistics facilities, 3 light manufacturing units, and 1 commercial storage complex. Marina laughed. It was sharp and brittle, like glass breaking. That's impossible. Edward slid a document toward Travis. My son's hands trembled as he picked it up. Current combined valuation, Edward continued, exceeds $7.2 million. The number landed like a stone in still water, ripples of shock spreading through the room. Travis stared at the paper. His mouth opened, then closed. His hands were shaking so badly the document rustled. Monthly passive income, Edward said, averages approximately $38,000, all documented, all compliant with state and federal regulations. Marina stepped back as if the table had bitten her. This is a joke, she said, but her voice was thin now, stretched tight. You lied. You've been lying this whole time. I met her eyes for the first time that evening, really met them. I never told you anything at all, I said quietly. Edward placed another file on the table. Additionally, Mrs. Whitmore holds diversified investments and liquid reserves. She requires no financial management from anyone. He paused, letting that sink in. She is, by any measure, independently wealthy. Someone at the table whispered, "Oh my God." Travis looked up at me, and I saw something break in his face. Not anger, something worse. Recognition. "Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why didn't you tell me?" I'd prepared for this question. I'd known it was coming, but hearing it still hurt. "Because I wanted you to become who you are without my money shaping you," I said. "I wanted you to work hard, to earn things, to respect what you built. I wanted you to know your own worth." I paused. "And because I never imagined you would help someone try to erase me." The words hung in the air like smoke. Travis's eyes filled. I thought I was protecting you." "From what?" I asked gently. "From dignity? From autonomy? From the right to make my own choices?" Marina's voice rose, defensive and sharp. "You let us struggle. You watched us drown and did nothing." I shook my head slowly. "I watched my son live honestly, build a career, learn to stand on his own. That's not watching you drown. That's watching him grow." I turned back to Edward. He understood the cue. "One final point," Edward said, his voice taking on a formal edge. "The credit card cancellation was executed through a technical loophole, authorized user status from a decade ago. However, any further attempts to access Mrs. Whitmore's accounts without explicit written consent would constitute financial exploitation under Michigan law." He looked directly at Marina. "Those actions would be prosecutable." Marina's face went white, then red. "This is manipulation. She set this up. She's been playing games this entire time." "No," I said, and my voice was steady. I've been living my life. You're the one who decided I didn't have the right to." The room was silent. Every person at that table was reassessing everything they'd thought they knew. Edward began gathering the documents, placing them back in his briefcase with the same care he'd used to take them out. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said formally, "unless you require anything further, I'll leave you with your family." "Thank you, Edward," I said. "I'll call you tomorrow." He nodded once, picked up his briefcase, and left. The door closed behind him with a sound that seemed to seal something shut. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Marina did. She turned to Travis, reaching for his arm as if claiming territory. Her voice shifted from disbelief to urgency in a single breath. "This isn't what it looks like," she said. "She manipulated this entire situation. She hid things from you for decades. How is that not control? How is that not—" Travis pulled his arm back. Slowly, deliberately. That movement hurt her more than any words could have. "You canceled my mother's card," he said. His voice was low, unsteady, but there was something new in it, something harder. "You made decisions about her life without asking her, without asking me." Marina's eyes filled, but the tears felt rehearsed. "I was protecting our family, our baby. I was trying to—" "You were trying to take over," Travis interrupted. "And you used me to do it." I stepped forward then, not to confront Marina, but to stand beside my son. "Protection doesn't require humiliation," I said quietly. "And care never begins by taking away someone's dignity." Marina's face hardened. The softness dropped like a mask falling away. "So what now? You win? You take him back? You take everything?" "I don't want to take anything," I said. "I just want my son to understand what he was helping you do." Travis looked at me then, really looked, not as a boy seeking approval, but as a man facing something he'd been avoiding. "I need space," he said to Marina. "I need to think without being pushed or managed or told what I should feel." Her voice sharpened, desperate. "If you walk away right now, don't expect me to make this easy. I'll fight for the house, for support, for everything. You understand that?" The threat hung in the air. Travis didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He just nodded once. "Then we'll handle it the right way," he said. "With lawyers, with mediation, with honesty." Marina laughed, but it was bitter. "Your mother taught you well." I met her gaze one last time. "No," I said. "Life did." Marina grabbed her coat from the rack by the door. Her movements were sharp, angry, barely controlled. "I hope you're happy," she said to me. "You just destroyed your son's family." "No," I replied. "You did that when you decided I wasn't worth respecting." She left without another word. The door slammed hard enough to rattle the frame. The echo filled the suddenly empty house. The family dispersed after that. Quickly, quietly, eyes averted. Apologies mumbled. "We didn't know. We're sorry. We should have asked questions." But no one stayed long enough to hear the answers they didn't want. Within 20 minutes, the house was empty except for Travis and me. He sat down heavily at the dining table, in the chair where Marina had stood triumphant just an hour before. His hands covered his face. "I didn't see it," he said, his voice muffled. "I let her turn me into someone I don't recognize." I sat beside him, in the chair I'd occupied all evening, the one at the far end, the one meant to keep me separate. "You saw what you wanted to believe," I said gently. "That doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." He looked up, eyes red. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, "you decide who you are when comfort is gone." The days that followed Christmas were not dramatic. They were quiet, heavy. Travis stayed with me for a while, sleeping in his old bedroom, the one with the desk he'd built models on, the walls still marked with pencil lines measuring his height year after year. He went to work. He came home exhausted. He thought. Marina called, then texted, then threatened. When fear didn't work, anger took over. Long messages about abandonment, about responsibility, about how he'd regret this. But something had shifted in Travis. He no longer reacted immediately. He listened. He asked questions. He stopped apologizing for setting boundaries. I didn't interfere. This was his fight now, his growth. When he finally told her he wanted a legal separation, His voice didn't shake. He explained it calmly, over the phone, while I sat in the next room pretending not to listen. I can't be in a marriage where I'm a tool, not a partner, he said. Where my mother is treated like an obstacle. Where control is confused with love. I heard Marina's voice through the phone, sharp and rising. The baby doesn't change that, Travis continued. I'll be a father. I'll show up. I'll provide support. But I won't pretend this marriage is something it's not. More shouting. Then we'll let the lawyers handle it, he said finally, and hung up. He came into the living room where I was sitting, supposedly reading a book I hadn't turned a page of in 20 minutes. I'm sorry, Mom, he said. For what? For not protecting you when you needed it. For choosing comfort over truth. I closed the book. Travis, you're human. Humans make mistakes. What matters is what you do after. He nodded, but the shame was still there, written in the slope of his shoulders. Can I ask you something? He said. Always. When did you decide to tell the truth? I thought about that. When I realized that silence was no longer protecting you. It was protecting her ability to hurt both of us. He was quiet for a moment. I wish you'd told me sooner. About the money. About everything. Would you have believed me? I asked. Or would you have thought I was a bitter mother who couldn't let go? He didn't answer, because we both knew the truth. The call came at 3 a.m. Mom! Travis's voice was breathless. Marina's in labor. The baby's coming. I was dressed and out the door in 10 minutes. The hospital was the same one where I'd received the news about Robert 38 years ago. Different building, same complex. The same smell of antiseptic and fear. Travis met me in the waiting room. He looked terrified and exhausted and young. How is she? I asked. Scared, he said. Angry, but okay. The doctors say everything's progressing normally. And you? Terrified, he admitted. I took his hand. That's how you're supposed to feel. We waited together through the early morning hours. Travis paced. I sat. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. At 6:47 a.m., a nurse came to get Travis. You can come in now, she said. He looked at me, uncertain. Go, I said. Be present. Be honest. Be the father you want to be. He squeezed my hand once, then followed the nurse through the double doors. I waited alone in the quiet morning light. An hour later, Travis came back out. His face was transformed, streaked with tears, but glowing with something I hadn't seen in months. It's a boy, he said. Joshua Robert Whitmore. Robert. He'd named him after his father. Can I see him? I asked. Marina said yes, Travis replied, and there was something in his voice. Surprise, maybe, or hope. I followed Travis through sterile hallways to a recovery room. Marina was propped up in bed, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. She looked exhausted, her perfect hair limp with sweat, her face bare of makeup. She looked real for the first time since I'd met her. When I entered, she tensed. Her arms tightened around the baby. I'm not here to fight, I said quietly. I'm here to meet my grandson. She stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. I approached the bed and looked down at the baby. He was impossibly small, red-faced and wrinkled, his tiny fists curled against his chest. His eyes were closed, but his mouth moved slightly, already searching for something. He's beautiful, I said, and I meant it with every part of me. Do you want to hold him? Marina asked. Her voice was hoarse, uncertain. May I? She nodded. I took Joshua carefully, supporting his head the way I'd learned 38 years ago with Travis. He was warm and light and perfect. In that moment, holding him, everything else fell away. Not the money, not the conflict, not the pride or pain, just this, a new life, a new chance. Marina, I said, still looking at Joshua, can we talk? Just the two of us? She glanced at Travis. He nodded and quietly left the room. When the door closed, I sat down in the chair beside her bed, still holding my grandson. I know why you did what you did, I said. She looked at me warily. What do you mean? I know about Ohio, about 2008, about your family losing everything. Her face went pale. How? Public records, I said gently. I'm not a detective. I'm just someone who wanted to understand. She looked away, jaw tight. So you know I'm damaged goods. Great. No, I said. I know you're afraid. There's a difference. Her eyes snapped back to me, angry tears forming. You don't know anything about me. I know what it feels like to lose everything, I said. I know what it feels like to watch someone you love die and realize you're completely alone with a child depending on you. I know what desperation tastes like. I looked down at Joshua, his peaceful sleeping face. The difference between us, I continued, is that my fear taught me to build. Yours taught you to take. I wasn't trying to take anything, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Yes, you were, I said, not unkindly. You were trying to take control because you thought control would keep you safe. But it won't, Marina. It never does. She was crying now, real tears, not performed ones. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Be a mother. Be a person who doesn't panic every time I see a bill. I know, I said. And then I told her something I'd decided months ago, in the quiet of my living room after Travis moved out. I'm going to help you, I said. Not because you deserve it. Not as a reward, but because Joshua deserves a mother who isn't afraid all the time. She looked at me, confused and suspicious. Help me how? I'll pay off your debts, I said. All $43,000. Her breath caught. But, I continued, there are conditions. You go to therapy, real therapy, not just a few sessions. You attend financial counseling for at least 6 months. You're honest with Travis about your past and your fears, and you never ever try to control me or anyone else in this family again. Why would you do this? She asked. After everything? I looked at the baby in my arms, my grandson, Travis's son, Marina's son. Because he needs you to heal, I said simply, and because I have the power to help that happen. I'd be a fool not to use it. Marina was silent for a long time. I don't deserve this, she finally said. No, I agreed. You don't. But grace isn't about deserving. It's about choosing a different path forward. I stood up and gently placed Joshua back in her arms. Think about it, I said, Siaiti said. No pressure, but the offer stands. I walked to the door, then paused. Marina, I said, you asked me once what I wanted. I'll tell you now. I want my grandson to grow up in a family where love isn't confused with control, where people are valued for who they are, not what they own, where fear doesn't make the decisions. I opened the door. That's all I've ever wanted. Christmas came again, as it always does. This time we gathered at my house. Not Travis's, not Marina's. Mine. It was a smaller group. Travis and Marina, separated but co-parenting. Joshua, now 7 months old, sitting in a high chair and laughing at everything. Edward Campbell and his wife, Janet, because Edward had become more than my attorney over the years. He'd become family. Richard Sullivan's daughter, Margaret, who'd taken over her father's properties after he passed and still called me for advice. And a few others. People who'd earned their place through kindness, not obligation. The house smelled like turkey and cinnamon, just as it had a year ago. But everything else was different. Marina helped in the kitchen, genuinely this time. She'd lost the brittleness, the constant assessment. Therapy was working. Slowly, but it was working. She and Travis weren't together. Maybe they never would be again. But they were learning how to be parents together. How to put Joshua first without erasing themselves. That was enough. After dinner, I held Joshua while he tried to grab my glasses. He giggled every time I pretended they'd disappeared. Travis sat beside me watching. Mom, he said quietly, I never thanked you. For what? For not giving up on us. For telling the truth even when it hurt. For helping Marina even after... He stopped, struggling with the words. After she tried to erase me? I finished. He nodded. Travis, I say. Ed. I didn't help her for her. I helped her for Joshua. And for you. Because you love her, even if you can't be with her right now. And love like that deserves support, not punishment. Joshua reached for Travis, and my son took him, holding him with the confidence of a year's practice. I'm trying to be the father you were a mother, he said. You already are, I replied. Later that night, after everyone had left, I sat alone in my living room with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, peaceful. On the mantel sat a new photo, Joshua's first Christmas. He was wearing a tiny red sweater and a huge smile. Beside it sat an older photo. Robert and me, young and hopeful, before the world taught us how hard hope could be. And beside that, Travis at 5 years old, grinning with missing front teeth. 3 generations, 3 different stories, all connected by the same thread. Love, real love, not the kind that controls or possesses, the kind that builds, that waits, that trusts. I'd spent 38 years building something in silence. Buildings, properties, wealth. But the real legacy wasn't in the deeds locked in Edward's office. It was in Travis learning to choose truth over comfort. It was in Marina learning that safety doesn't come from control. It was in Joshua, who would grow up knowing that dignity is worth protecting. That was the inheritance that mattered. Not the money I'd saved, but the values I'd lived. My phone buzzed with a text. Marina, thank you for today, and for everything. I'm trying. I smiled and typed back. I know. Keep trying. That's all any of us can do. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the snow falling softly on Detroit. This city had taught me how to survive, how to build from nothing, how to wait for the right moment. But it had also taught me something else, that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is speak, that silence has power, but only when it's chosen, never when it's forced. That legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you build into the people you love. I finished my tea and turned off the lights. Tomorrow, I'd fix a broken hydraulic lift at one of my properties. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Because some skills should never be forgotten. And because I'd learned a long time ago that the best way to understand something is to know how to repair it when it breaks. Machines, properties, families. The principles were the same. Understanding, patience, and the willingness to do the hard work no one else sees. I walked up to bed, tired but content. The silence of the house wasn't empty anymore. It was full of possibility. And that, I thought, was the best inheritance of all.